The bulldozer's engine roared as it chewed through the last of my rain garden. Neighbors clapped, HOA board members smiled, and somewhere deep beneath the hillside, the soil shifted, like it knew this was war. All because I planted flowers instead of turf. They called it non-compliant landscaping. I called it erosion control. They sent fines, I sent science. But when the rains came, Mother Nature chose a side, and spoiler alert, it wasn't Karen's. Want to know how HOA stupidity triggered a landslide? Buckle up. They say midlife crises come with red convertibles and questionable tattoos. Mine came with a shovel and an unhealthy obsession with milkweed. I used to be a software engineer at a 28 monitors, 4 cold brews a day, and a chair so ergonomic it required a certification course. But after a decade of deadlines and corporate nonsense, I cashed out my stock options, packed up my overpriced apartment in the city, and bought a sloped slice of paradise on the edge of Greendale Ridge. It was quiet, peaceful, just me, the birds, and a dangerously steep backyard that looked like it might slide into the valley if someone sneezed too hard. Now, I didn't move out there to become some crunchy granola earth wizard. I just wanted something low maintenance and meaningful, something that didn't require a leaf blower every other day. That's when I discovered rain gardens. A little Google rabbit hole turned into soil samples, contour lines, and late nights watching videos titled things like Swales, the unsung heroes of stormwater management. Before I knew it, I had a blueprint drawn and chalk on my garage wall and 10 bags of native seeds in my trunk. No sod, no concrete, just deep-rooted native plants, pollinator habitats, and a system designed to stop erosion before it started. By the time spring rolled around, the place looked like a cross between a wildflower meadow and a landscaping experiment gone rogue. But it worked. Water that used to turn my hill into a mudslide now danced gently through rock-lined channels, soaking into the earth. Bees showed up. Monarchs made it a pit stop. Even the squirrels seemed less jerky. And to my surprise, most of the neighbors loved it. I got a few nods, even a thumbs up or two from dog walkers. One guy named Mark offered to trade tomato seedlings for milkweed clippings. Life was good until it wasn't. Enter whole care. You know the type. Platinum hair shellacked into architectural defiance of gravity, pastel cardigan draped like royalty's cape, and a facial expression permanently stuck between disapproval and lemon juice. She lived 3 houses up the hill in a stucco palace with topiary lions guarding the driveway. I first met her, or rather felt her, on a Thursday morning while I was digging out a new base. I looked up and saw her watching me like I was spray painting graffiti on Mount Rushmore. No words, no waves, just a glare sharp enough to trim hedges. I didn't think much of it then. I figured maybe she just wasn't a fan of dirt or men in cargo shorts. But over the next few days, I noticed a pattern. Every time I worked on the garden, she'd appear on the sidewalk, by her mailbox, behind the hedge with binoculars. Okay, maybe not binoculars, but I wouldn't have been surprised. At first, I thought she hated weeds. But the more I watched her watching me, the more it clicked. It wasn't the milkweed. It wasn't the messy wildflowers or the swales she claimed looked like ditches. No, what really got under her perfectly moisturized skin was this. It wasn't weeds she hated. It was control she couldn't have. 3 weeks after I planted the final bunch of blue graham and stepped back to admire what I was now calling the anti-lawn, a crisp white envelope showed up taped to my front door. No stamp, no smiley face, just the HOA logo and soulless Helvetica and the words, "Friendly reminder, compliance concern." I opened it while standing in the driveway, still wearing gardening gloves. Apparently, my property was exhibiting landscape inconsistencies that may negatively impact neighborhood cohesion. In other words, my garden had too much personality. My favorite line, we encourage residents to embrace a unified visual aesthetic reflective of Silverwood values. If that sounds like cult talk, it's because it is. Still, I figured this was a classic misunderstanding. Maybe they thought the garden was temporary. Maybe they didn't realize it had actual environmental benefits. So I crafted the nerdiest peace offering known to man. I printed out a laminated sheet explaining how rain gardens reduce runoff, support pollinators, and prevent soil erosion. I even added a QR code that linked to a cute little website titled, "Why My Yard Looks Like a Wildflower Rave." Then, for good measure, I installed small wooden signs throughout the garden. One said, "Pollinator habitat, buzz in." Another said native species zone, not weeds, just local. My favorite? Rain garden, Mother Nature approved. For a brief moment, I thought I'd won. The letters stopped. Neighbors gave more compliments. One couple even asked me for planting tips. But then came the morning I made eye contact with the storm. I was planting a small echinacea patch near the mailbox when I heard the unmistakable clack of designer heels on pavement. I looked up. There she was. Now, holy Karen herself, hair sprayed into Helma-grade submission, lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a lemon, and eyes scanning my garden like it owed her money. "Good morning," I offered. She didn't reply, just stared at my milkweed like it had insulted her mother. Then she finally said, "Nature belongs in national parks, not neighborhoods," and walked off without another word, as if she'd just delivered some sort of philosophical mic drop. Now, I could have laughed it off, maybe even did a little, but that same week I found out something interesting during trivia night at the local pub. Apparently, 2 years ago, Karen had lost the Yard of the Year title to a newer resident who'd installed, wait for it, clover turf. Rumor was she never recovered. Some say she still waters her lawn twice a day just to keep it award ready, even during drought alerts. So yeah, this wasn't about community standards. It was about turf war. And she wasn't just the self-appointed sheriff of lawn aesthetics. She was a dethroned queen with a grudge. So I kept gardening, I kept planting. I even added a rock feature shaped vaguely like a turtle just because I could. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. I knew she had more stationery, more capital letters. And boy, was I right. Because 1 week later, I came home from the grocery store, dropped my bags, and saw it stuck to the door like a bad omen. Same envelope, same font. But this time, the subject line wasn't a warning. It was a bill. So there was an official-looking invoice taped to my door like a parking ticket from the landscaping police. I peeled it off slowly as if hoping it might vanish if I blinked hard enough. But nope, bold black letters. Restoration services rendered $5,000, 0 cents due upon receipt. According to the fine print, I had violated HOA Code 7B12, subsection Uniform Landscaping Expectations, and thus my property had been professionally corrected to match community standards. I laughed out loud, like Snodley snorted in the driveway kind of laugh. Professionally corrected? What did they do, throw a bucket of Roundup and call it a day? The truth, unfortunately, was worse, much worse. Monday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I rushed outside in pajama pants and mismatched socks to find a group of guys in neon vests standing beside a Bobcat loader. One of them waved at me like this was a scheduled brunch. Their truck read Greenverse LLC, which I later found out had been registered exactly 3 months ago and had no online presence, no website, no reviews, just vibes. I asked who sent them. The guy with the clipboard shrugged and said, "HOA, work order, landscaper mediation." He pronounced remediation like he was proud he could spell it. I demanded to see a permit, a supervisor, anything that made this make sense. Instead, he handed me a duplicate invoice and pointed at a signature at the bottom. "Looks like you've been flagged by Karen W." Of course. Karen with the clipboard, Karen with the crusade, Karen who, as it turns out, didn't need a board meeting or community vote, just enough power to sneak through a fake emergency session and call it policy. And while I stood there arguing with Vest Guy, they were already ripping up the milkweed and pulling out the swales like they were digging for treasure. You ever watch someone destroy 3 months of backbreaking labor in 20 minutes while chewing gum and humming top 40 hits? It does something to you. By noon, my rain garden was toast. The pollinator signs were cracked in half. The boulders I'd hauled one by one from the creek were dumped in a pile, and the earth, once carefully layered with mulch and native soil, had been churned into a mud pit. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but no, because 2 houses over, my neighbor Bill was live streaming the whole thing. He'd pulled out a lawn chair, made popcorn, and was narrating like it was a nature documentary. "And here we have the common landscaper restoring conformity in its natural habitat," he said into his phone. At one point, his wife yelled, "Ooh, they just crushed the Turtle Rock." And someone off screen actually clapped. That night, I stood in the wreckage with dirt on my shoes and fury in my chest. This wasn't some HOA tiff anymore. This wasn't about wildflowers or lawn envy or even Karen's Lost Yard of the Year trophy. This was deliberate, coordinated, destructive. I stared at the invoice again and laughed, but this time it was the kind of laugh that doesn't reach your eyes, because at that moment I understood something very clearly. You thought this was a landscaping issue, it was geological warfare. It started with a drizzle. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of rain that makes you want to put on flannel and pretend you're in a coffee commercial. I sat on my porch sipping from a mug that said, "This might be wine," and watched the raindrops bounce off what used to be my rain garden. Except now, there was no soft mulch or thirsty roots, just raw, exposed dirt. Water pooled on the surface, circled aimlessly like it was looking for directions, and then, like a teenager with a fake ID, snuck past my yard and bolted straight downhill. Within a few days, the drizzle turned into proper rain, the kind that hums through gutters and makes your window screens look like abstract art. I started noticing subtle changes: sidewalk cracks stretching wider, fence posts leaning like drunk uncles at a barbecue. The Andersons, who lived 2 doors down, suddenly had a dip in their front lawn that looked suspiciously like a sinkhole, auditioning for a bigger role. Meanwhile, the HOA sent out a cheerful bulletin that read, "Rain is a natural part of the Greendale Ridge ecosystem. Remember to clean your gutters and remain proactive." It ended with a Cliff Bar umbrella. Very helpful. Then came the email from Karen. Subject line: "Drainage is a personal responsibility." In it, she gently reminded all homeowners that flooding is often the result of laziness, not landscaping. Laziness, as if a decade of rain science could be outsmarted by raking leaves aggressively. She even included a photo of a soggy flower bed with the caption, "Don't let this be you." What she didn't include was any acknowledgement of the giant rain sponge she personally bulldozed into oblivion. Selective memory meet power trip. At that point, I figured I need a backup, real backup. So I called Troy Langston, an old friend from college who now worked as a hydrologist and soil engineer. Troy was the kind of guy who wore hiking boots to formal events and referred to mud as terrain feedback. He showed up the next day with a backpack full of tools, a GoPro strapped to his chest, for science apparently, and the energy of a man who lives for disaster. As we walked the property in the rain, he poked metal rods into the ground, muttered things like, "Not ideal," and collected mud samples in tiny jars, like he was prepping for a doomsday smoothie. After 2 hours of silent diagnostics and the occasional dramatic squint, Troy finally looked at me and said, "Eli, you're sitting on a loaded spring." Not exactly comforting. He explained it without the rain garden to manage absorption. Rainwater was now saturating the upper soil layers, flowing down until it hit compacted clay. The water couldn't escape, so it was building pressure, pushing the hillside from the inside out. He sketched a terrifying diagram that looked like a sandwich ready to explode. "If this keeps up," he said, "this slope is going to move, and when it does, it won't ask permission." I stood there in the drizzle, the wind tugging at my hoodie, Troy's sketch flapping in my hand like a warning from the earth itself. It hit me all at once. This wasn't a petty HOA feud anymore. This was physics. This was gravity. This was Karen versus geology. And, spoiler alert, geology doesn't negotiate. I thanked Troy, promised to email him copies of the garden blueprints and HOA correspondent, and watched him drive off into the mist like some muddy prop. That night, as the rain came down harder and the wind howled through the trees, I sat in my living room staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, relentless rhythm of water against windows. And then, around 2:17 a.m., there was a sound. A sharp, deep crack, like the earth had just cleared its throat. I sat upright, heart pounding. Somewhere outside, something had shifted. I didn't know what yet, but I knew one thing for sure, and that night, the hill made its first move. I was brushing my teeth the next morning when I heard it, the kind of deep, echoing crunch that doesn't belong in a neighborhood. Birds stopped chirping. My electric toothbrush paused mid-cycle, still buzzing against my molars. I rushed to the front window and saw neighbors pouring out of their houses, robes flapping, dogs barking, phones already recording. I grabbed my hoodie, ran outside barefoot, and followed the murmurs up the hill toward Karen's palace. Her backyard retaining wall, formerly a pristine showcase of faux stone and Pinterest inspiration, had split clean down the middle, One half had completely collapsed, unleashing a mudslide the size of a school bus. The sludge poured over the hill like chocolate fondue from hell, taking out a brand new cedar fence, two decorative bird baths, and most of the Jacksons' backyard landscaping on its way down. Karen was on her patio, barefoot, screaming into her phone while ankle deep in water. "Greg, Greg, the koi pond is in the living room," she yelled. Her husband, poor guy, stood next to her holding a garden rake like he was about to duel Poseidon. As neighbors gathered to take it all in, some gasping, others pretending not to enjoy it, one thing became clear: this was no isolated incident. The hill was giving up. The ground under Karen's house was now a slurry of wet clay and regret. You'd think that would spark a little self-awareness, maybe even an apology. Think again. That same afternoon, the HOA held an emergency town hall at the community center. Karen was there, of course, hair slightly damp, but still determined to win an imaginary PR battle. "Let's not jump to conclusions," she said, with her usual cheerleader voice. "This wasn't about the garden. It's clearly due to overwatering. Perhaps residents have been too enthusiastic with their lawns." Overwatering, right. Nothing screams, "Oops, too much sprinkling," like a literal wall collapse. I raised my hand to speak, holding Troy's soil report and a thick folder of photos documenting every crack, dip, and landslide from the past 2 weeks. Karen smiled and called on someone else, then moved to close the meeting early. People started muttering. One guy in the back whispered, "Didn't she vote to bulldoze the garden?" Another said, "I told her that hill looked sketchy." And just like that, the blame game began. So I did what any tech-savvy guy with a grudge and receipts would do. I uploaded everything: Troy's erosion analysis, my before and after photos, screenshots of the HOA's own bylaws, a video of the Bobcat loader tearing up the garden, and yes, even a blurry photo of Karen laughing with a bulldozer driver. I posted it all to the neighborhood forum, Greendale Chatter, which up until then was mostly used to discuss suspicious raccoons and whose kid left a bike in the cul-de-sac. The post went viral, not internet viral, but HOA viral, which is honestly scarier. Within an hour, 20 comments, then 50. People were furious. Homeowners who never said a word before were now asking for financial audits, resignations, and my personal favorite, a public apology to the rain garden. For the first time, it wasn't just me against Karen. It was me and physics, and now half the neighborhood. Still, part of me thought this might be the high point, the satisfying climax. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because while Karen's koi were busy learning how to swim on hardwood floors, the hillside wasn't done shifting. And neither was I. You think this was the climax? Oh, no. This was only Act 2. The morning after the mudslide, I stopped staring at the damage and started calling lawyers. After 4 rejections, one firm that suggested I just move to flatter land, and a guy named Dan who quoted me $800, 0 cents/hour, and then asked if I owned a Tesla, I found her Jordan Lee. Sharp suit, sharper wit, voice like a podcast host who doesn't let guests finish dumb sentences. She specialized in exactly my kind of problem: HOAs that act like small dictatorships with legal stationery. When I finished explaining everything from the garden to the bulldozer to Karen's koi swimming lessons, she leaned back, smiled, and said, "Oh, honey, they just gave us a buffet." By the end of the week, we'd filed suit against the HOA for property destruction, abuse of authority, fraudulent contract, and reckless endangerment. We also named individual board members, including Karen, for acting outside their scope and causing measurable harm. That's when things got really spicy. Turns out the landscaping company, Greenverse LLC, wasn't just shady because they wore neon vests and didn't have a website. No, it was shady because it was owned by Matthew Whitmore, Karen's cousin, who she conveniently refers to as her family friend, and had been registered 3 months before the bulldozing. The contract? Awarded without bids. The payment? A generous $20,000, 0 cents, despite the entire job looking like it had been done by caffeinated raccoons. Jordan was giddy. "This isn't just negligence," she said, flipping through emails we subpoenaed. "This is a Netflix episode waiting to happen." One thread in particular sealed the deal. Karen emailing the board saying, I don't care what some dirt hippie says about erosion, that garden's gotta go. Yeah, she put that in writing and CC'd 3 people. Bless her digital heart. Now, you'd think this revelation would make the HOA back down, apologize, offer to settle. Nope, they did what overconfident HOAs always do. They hired a $60,000 zero-cent downtown law firm and charged it to the Community Reserve Fund. You could practically hear the collective gasp across Greendale Ridge. That money was supposed to be for things like pool repairs and new benches in the park, not defending Karen's backyard tantrum. The neighborhood forum exploded. People who hadn't posted in years came out of digital retirement to ask things like, wait, did we just pay 60 grand to protect a lady who sank her own koi pond? Meanwhile, Jordan dropped bomb after bomb in pretrial. She got the judge to admit all the internal emails, the no-bid contract, the erosion report Troy had submitted months earlier. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that I hadn't properly maintained my yard post-demolition. Jordan laughed, handed over 12 time-stamped photos of the mud crater and said, my client didn't maintain it because your client leveled it. The judge raised an eyebrow so high it almost achieved orbit. By this point, the board was in full meltdown. Karen had stopped attending public meetings. Homeowners were organizing petition drives. One neighbor even started printing "Reinstate the Rain Garden" bumper stickers. But somehow, against all logic and public opinion, the HOA dug in deeper. They had one last legal argument up their sleeve. I remember sitting in the courtroom, watching their lawyer stand up confidently, papers in hand, and say, Your Honor, we believe the rain garden posed a threat to community uniformity and therefore was subject to removal. I looked at Jordan, she looked at me, and we both nearly choked trying not to laugh. The HO had one last defense, but it was the dumbest thing they could have done. Courtroom day, you could sell popcorn. I showed up 10 minutes early, only to find the place already packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, whispering like they were about to watch a live episode of Judge Judy HOA edition. People I hadn't seen in months suddenly cared deeply about property law. One guy brought a folding chair, someone else brought a neck pillow. What they didn't bring? Karen. She was a no-show. Her attorney claimed she was traveling for personal reasons, which I'm pretty sure was code for hiding until the HOA firestorm passes or Florida accepts her as one of their own. As the hearing began, Jordan stood like a gladiator with a binder instead of a sword. She calmly laid out every detail, photos of the rain garden, the illegal demolition, the internal emails, and of course the erosion report they ignored. She even had copies of Karen's HOA newsletters, complete with inspirational quotes about preserving harmony. The irony was so thick you could have paved a driveway with it. Then came the real moment, the one that turned the whole room into stunned silence. The HOA lawyer tried to claim that the board had never been explicitly warned of the consequences. That's when Jordan dropped the bomb. She pulled out a printed email from Karen's inbox. Karen had written, word for word, I don't care what some dirt hippie says about erosion, that ugly weed patch has got to go. Followed by, if it slides, we'll deal with it later. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Even the judge leaned forward, reading it twice as if she couldn't believe someone had typed that and hit send. The HOA attorney visibly wilted. He tried to object. Jordan, without missing a beat, handed the judge the email chain, complete with timestamps and CCs. Your Honor, she said, they didn't just ignore expert advice, they mocked it. I swear, I saw someone in the front row fist bump their spouse. By the end of the hearing, it was over. Not officially. Judges take time to write opinions and all that, but everyone in that room knew who had won. I walked out of that courthouse into the sunshine and didn't even feel petty about it. Okay, maybe a little petty, especially when a few weeks later, the for sale sign went up in front of Karen's house, right next to the cracked retaining wall and the yard that had gone from golf course green to jungle mode over. No more topiary lions, no more HOA bulletins, just dandelions up to your knees and a sagging mailbox that screamed former empire. Rumors flew she'd moved to Tampa or Phoenix or beach town with no zoning laws and no internet. No one knew for sure. Her house sat empty for months, scaring off buyers like it had its own haunted backstory. One guy did a walkthrough and left halfway through, mumbling, "Yeah, no." Eventually, someone bought it at a laughable price, flipped it, and turned the backyard into a Zen garden, full circle. You think that would be the end, right? Garden destroyed, court won, Karen banished, neighborhood humbled. But the truth is, this wasn't just about a garden. It never was. It was about people choosing image over substance, control over collaboration. And in the end, the land didn't care about bylaws or bulletins. It just wanted balance. Justice was served, but karma was still hungry. The check cleared on a Tuesday. I stared at my bank account for a solid minute, half expecting the numbers to glitch and turn back into normal people money. But there it was, over $1,200,000, 0 cents in legal justice, poetic karma, and HOA-funded landscaping revenge. After I paid off legal fees, donated to a few erosion control nonprofits, because irony is delicious, and bought a new pair of boots, I did exactly what any sane person would do. I rebuilt my rain garden, but bigger. I hired Troy again, this time not as a favor, but as project lead. We brought in engineers, hydrologists, and a crew that treated dirt like sacred geometry. Over 3 months, we reshaped the entire slope into a multi-tiered rain management masterpiece. Native shrubs lined the top tier, deep-rooted grasses filled the mid-slope, and at the bottom, a basin garden that could swallow a summer thunderstorm without spilling a drop. We installed swales, rock berms, and even a tiny stream with a hidden French drain. It didn't just protect my house, it stabilized the entire hillside. And yes, we added the sign. Centered in a carved limestone boulder, bold letters read, "Stabilizing your homes since 2025, paid for by bad decisions." It faced the road because, of course, it did. People slowed their cars to read it. Some rolled down windows and laughed. A few old neighbors even stopped by and nodded with something that looked suspiciously like respect. Meanwhile, things around Greendale Ridge started to shift, literally and metaphorically. The Hoke HOA, now under new management, Red, not Karen, began listening for once. They held real community meetings, invited experts to speak on erosion prevention, and even organized workshops on native plant gardening. What used to be a monoculture of sad turf grass became a patchwork of creative, climate-smart yards. I saw front lawns with milkweed, goldenrod, and yes, even clover. The new HOA president, Rachel, showed up at one meeting wearing hiking boots and handing out wildflower seed packets. I almost cried. Almost. One afternoon, I was sipping coffee on my porch. Same mug, different piece. When I saw something that made me pause. A group of kids was playing near the lowest tier of the new garden. They were laughing, hopping between stepping stones, chasing butterflies. No one was yelling at them. No one was citing code violations. No one was worried about the grass being too wild. And I realized something. This was what it was always supposed to be, a place where nature and people could exist without either being bulldozed to death. Karen's old house, still standing technically. It changed hands a few times. The new owner put up solar panels and replaced the back patio with a vegetable garden. The retaining wall was rebuilt correctly this time. And rumor has it they even planted service berries, not for the aesthetics, but because they're good for the soil and the birds. Poetic, really. Of course, not everything healed perfectly. The scars on the slope were still there, hidden beneath mulch and green, but remembered by every root. Some neighbors never returned. Some fences never got straight again. But Greendale Ridge had learned something, even if it came the hard way. And maybe that's the only way neighborhoods ever change, when the ground literally shakes them awake. I took one last sip of coffee, let the breeze carry the scent of bergamot and damp soil across the porch, and smiled. The storm had passed. The garden had returned, and this time it wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had finally opened their eyes, because in the end, you can't fight the land and win. But if you listen to it, if you respect it, it might just save you. So what's the lesson here? Simple. Never underestimate nature or a guy with a garden and a flash drive full of receipts. Whether it's HOA drama or everyday life, people love control. But when you bulldoze what you don't understand, don't be surprised when the hill fights back. Respect is a two-way street, especially when that street is sinking. If you've ever dealt with an overzealous HOA, a petty neighbor, or someone who said, "It's just a few plants," drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one. Yes, even the spicy ones. Smash that like button if you believe wildflowers deserve a vote, and subscribe for more real-life revenge plots powered by compost, common sense, and chaos. Thanks for sticking with me through the storm. Now go plant something, preferably legal. Or not. I'm not your HOA.